everyone. Thanks for joining us again on the Cultivate podcast from the Grove Church. I am Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there. And we have with us again, Cass Harris. What's up?
Repeat.
I know. The guest's so nice, he had to come back twice. It's Cass Harris, worship pastor and elder at the Grove Church. That was good, wasn't it? I was
sure.
I was working on that on the drive up here.
Whole way?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. And last time, if you joined us last time, we just spent some time just talking about how to process Old Testament narratives, how to, like, there's things that we miss, things that we get intimidated by. I think God's got a lot of great things to say to us in Old Testament narratives, and very often we just miss them. And right now, I don't know when you're listening to this, but as we are recording this, we are in the middle of a series on the book of Ruth in our church, which is kind of what had this Old Testament issue kind of in my head for one. And I think it's also just good for the people who are kind of doing these podcasts as we go. It's kind of be some supplemental materials, but also just a really good opportunity, I think, for us to apply some of the principles that we talked about last week. So we got this story of Ruth, and I'm just going to read the first few verses here. And then I just want you, Cass, to just kind of tell me, like, based on these principles and things we talked about last time, like, what are some things about this story already that stick out to you? Verse 1, chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They are Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they had lived there about 10 years. Both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now, I feel like that most of us, when we would read an Old Testament story like that, would just kind of look at that as, okay, that is just kind of generic intro to the story. And we're like, okay, get to the story. What, if anything, though, for you, kind of stands out in those 5 verses?
Yeah. So first thing that jumps out to me is context in the time of the judges. Mm-hmm. We have a whole book of Judges, and that kind of weird in between time when Israel would kind of get off the rails. God would send a judge and kind of right the ship a little bit, and it's like this just big cycle that happens. And so we have context of kind of when this is. Mm-hmm. I think that's big. Another thing that jumps out is Moab,
right?
Neighboring country, modern day Jordan. If I'm not mistaken, Moab is from the daughters of Lot that he
my word
that he had sex with his own daughters, and these are the people that settled Moab.
Top 3 worst stories in the Bible as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. They flee Sodom and Gomorrah.
Right.
And his wife doesn't make it. Her husbands don't even leave. And the wife dies because she turns around and turns into salt. And it's just the dad and the 2 daughters hiding in a cave. And they're like, we don't have husbands. We don't have any sons. Let's get dad drunk and have sex with him.
Yeah. Great story.
Yep. And so one of those sons was a guy named Moab, who was the father of the Moabites.
Yes. And so here we have, and so another thing is I just see famine, and there's such it's a theme in the Old Testament. There's famine, and what do you do? What do you do when you don't have what you need? And one thing that jumps out to me here is they didn't go to Egypt. Every other time that it mentions famine, people go to Egypt because there's always food in Egypt.
Right.
But for some reason, they decided to go to Moab, which I just think of that and think, well, there's probably a famine there too. It's like literally right over the mountain. So I don't really know what to do with that. But the fact that they leave their people and go somewhere else, it's just interesting to me why they would actually leave.
Yeah, it still feels to me, even like you said, they very often go to Egypt, and Egypt in the Old Testament very often represents kind of the opposite of God, right?
Yes,
it's there's God and there's not God, and that's Egypt.
Right.
But it still feels to me like to leave God's promised land,
right,
to go anywhere else,
right,
is an intentional step outside of God's protection.
For sure. It feels like that way for sure. Yeah.
And the Moabites, they said they're essentially racially they're cousins because of Lot's connection to Abraham. So they're they're not different in that sense, but they had beef.
Big time. Yeah, they weren't allowed in the assembly. They were kind of on a short list with the Israelites for sure. Like we don't really do anything with them. Yeah.
Right. There are some foreigners that can fairly easily assimilate into the larger Israelite community, but the Moabites couldn't.
Nope. And
it has to do with, essentially they opposed Israel as they were headed from Egypt to the promised land.
Right.
And so the great story, I already mentioned one of the top 3 worst stories. This is one of the top 3 best stories where the Moabites hire a prophet to curse them. And he won't curse them. He just won't. He comes up to him and he sees them and he asks God, and God says, no, you better not. So he blesses them. And the king of Moab's like, what if we come look at him over here? Take him all these different ways. Not bless him now, bless him now, curse him. And he just keeps blessing them. And then finally he's like, okay, will you just come with me? And God says to this guy, he's like, this guy named Balaam, he's like, sure, you can go with them. So God theoretically gives permission for him to go. But on the road, it says God is angry that he's going and opposes him. And a giant angel with a sword is in the road. And the donkey sees it.
And starts talking.
And it's like, and then finally he just starts beating his donkey. He's like, why do you keep leaving off the road? And donkey's like, you not see that big dude with the sword? And it says that, it says God opened the mouth of the donkey. And the best part of the story is donkey starts talking to him. And Balaam just starts talking back.
He just talks back.
I mean, it's like, the only appropriate response to that is talking donkey.
Yeah.
But right. He's like, you gotta get back on the road, stupid donkey. That's why I'm beating you. Anyways. So all that to say, so they've got beef with Moab. And so now all of a sudden we are going to this place, and now we've got entering into this are 2 Moabite women, which we're not supposed to feel great about. One of them is Ruth, and that's the person who the book is named after. So at this point, I've kind of got we've got some questions. How can a Moabite get her own book?
Right.
So what do you think? So like in the process of this, we've got them leaving God's protection, going to Moab, which they shouldn't, and it seems that the result is all the men in the family die.
Right.
Are we supposed to take something from that?
I mean, I don't know how you don't. I mean, you flee God's protection. You go outside of what he has kind of said. He said, I'm giving you this land. I'm going to take care of you. And at first sign of conflict or you bolt.
Right.
There's something to be said for that. Absolutely. And it's really unfortunate because in that culture, it's a very patriarchal culture with a woman without her husband. It has nothing, has no power. And just completely abandons when they die. It just completely leaves them out to dry. Right.
It doesn't explicitly say that they died because they were under some curse of God. It doesn't say that God did anything. God as a character in this story has not shown up yet. But it feels pretty safe to say that an original reader of this would have felt that.
Yeah. Even Naomi is recognizing it. I mean, her words are, God has abandoned me. He's cursed me, and changes her name. So yeah, I think the fact that Naomi says that, as a reader, you're going to be like, oh man, they should not have gone over there. The very first thing they go to Moab, a reader's going to be like, oh, I don't know if I like this story. Yeah.
And so, and what happens, at least until this point, is exactly what you think would happen. You go there, you go to a place you shouldn't, you're outside of God's protection, you marry Moabite women.
Yep. Everything's going wrong. Yep.
And then everything goes wrong. That makes sense. And then you have this next verse, which I think, again, is just kind of a little, I don't know if dig is the right word, but it's like when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them.
Mm-hmm.
And like, ouch. I mean, like you should have stayed.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should have stayed.
Absolutely.
And so now she's got her 2 daughters-in-law. I have to work really hard at that. It's daughters-in-law. It's not daughter-in-laws.
Oh yeah.
Write that down. Daughters-in-law. Anyways, her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. So Naomi says she's going to go back to Israel. You girls, you should just go back with your families, get a husband here, you stay here, which really makes sense. And Orpah does that.
Yeah, she's not doing anything wrong here. She's actually trying to take care of them. Listen, you got nothing with me. You can actually still make something of yourself here. Yeah.
Right. And Orpah's sad about it. She loves Naomi, obviously, but she goes back to her family, but Ruth will not. And basically makes this declaration of like, hey, your people are my people. Your God is going to be my God. I mean, cross stitches and inspirational posters everywhere with this passage on it of just Ruth's declaration of nothing will separate me from you, Naomi. Why? I mean, we're speculating here, but I think based on what we talked about last week, I think this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to stop because that's a shocking thing.
Yeah. That
the Moabite would would do that. A Moabite?
Mm-hmm.
But why? Why do you think Ruth made that decision?
Yeah, I think my best guess is that despite my upbringing and teaching during this time of Israel, of them constantly just doing wrong, that they actually had a reputation for being good, for taking care of people. And I think she saw an opportunity. Like, I think I know how they work. And I think if I go back, I actually have a chance of being taken care of.
Right.
And there's something about this God of Israel. I mean, they've heard stories. There's a reputation there, and they're really literally just right over the mountain. I mean, there's going to be contact there. And I think that she sees this as an opportunity. Like, I see something in your God of Israel that I want.
Yeah, I think it speaks both to Ruth's character, like what you're saying, of just of a real sense of understanding and appreciating who God is. But I think by extension, then that points to Naomi's character too. She's the only one that's left, and whatever Ruth saw in God, she saw, I think, primarily through her experience with Naomi. And so whatever it was that Naomi did, like even Orpah, it was a difficult decision for her to leave her. Even though, again, I don't think Orpah did anything wrong by going back to her family. It was difficult. There was something about the character and reputation of Naomi, but then Ruth saw that and wants to cling to her and cling to God. I mean, it explicitly says, "Your God will be my God." And so again, here we have here in the first chapter is the building of an unlikely hero. She's the wrong person from the wrong country, wrong gender, in a cursed family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cards are stacked.
Right, but she is demonstrating extraordinary character and commitment, not only to her mother-in-law, but ultimately to God as well. So then they end up back in Israel, and the first thing they got to do is they got to figure out how to get food. And so the process they go through is she's just going to go out and start gathering. So this would have been very normal to them. Maybe you can explain kind of why was this what they had to do to get food?
Yeah. And this is again, understanding that God's kind of command to Israel of always leaving extra for the alien, the orphan, and the widow. So when it was time to harvest, you didn't cut the corners of your field. You know, you're talking a pretty small field. And I think it was barley harvest, I think is what it says. So they're harvesting barley. And so when they went around to harvest it, they would just kind of circle on those corners and leave some for people that didn't have anything. They could come out and pick their own food. And I think even it's in Leviticus, even if a like a strand is dropped, like a whole stalk, that you're not supposed to pick it up. You leave it for someone, because there's already a lot of work that's been done there, and even supposed to leave that. And so we see that happening as well. So I love it that we see, and I think this kind of goes to the reputation that maybe Ruth knew of, that that here is a group of people in Israel that's actually doing what God asked them to do. They're actually walking it out. They're saying, I'm not going to take everything in this field. I'm going to leave some for the people that don't have anything, which is what God was all about from the very beginning. I love that part of the story.
So Ruth's faithfulness and trust and belief in God that she saw through Naomi, she's now experiencing it through the people at large by them having an attitude that says, right, we want to make sure that widows are taken care of. And so she ends up in the field of a guy named Boaz, who turns out to be a relative of Elimelech, her dead father-in-law.
Right.
And Naomi's response was, I mean, she's thrilled.
Yeah.
Because she didn't go there on purpose.
Right.
She didn't know. Ruth didn't know. She just, coincidentally, wink, wink, ends up in a cousin. And Naomi describes it this way. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to Zara. He has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead. And she added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers. So she ends up in this place where it's a cousin, and this cousin is very kind to her and just make sure that she has extra food that she can gather, is very kind. And Naomi's excited. Hey, not only is this guy the cousin, he's not only is he a really nice guy, but he's one of our guardian redeemers. And so I'm guessing that there are people who would read that and be like, oh yeah, okay, guardian redeemer, and would keep going, like original readers. Just seems like two really weird Bible words put together to me to make one mega Bible word.
Right. What
is a guardian redeemer? You got anything for me? What is a guardian redeemer?
Yeah, there's a whole, there's chapters in Leviticus that talk about redeeming, and really it's this way of anyone that has lost their power, they've lost their influence, they've lost their ability to survive. Really, you have someone that's lost their land, or they've lost family with this patriarchal society. If it's a female that their husband has died, so it fits the situation, there's a chance for them to get back in to the family. They had nothing, and they're saying this is a chance that Boaz can actually redeem Ruth and Naomi and give them what they need again. Without that, they would just be hopefully finding a field with nice people for the rest of their lives. They stumbled on this one. Not all the fields were necessarily going to be that way. They stumbled on a nice one, but without actual redeeming. And so a lot goes into that. I mean, we're going to see that here later in the story. There's the purchasing of the land that was in that family. There's also, continuing the line of Elimelech, which actually is pretty significant as well, that Boaz would do whenever he makes this decision. So a lot's happening there, but the fact that we're seeing not just I'm going to take care of you today, but this is I'm going to take care of you always.
Right,
is the big part of that. It's a whole system in the Levitical code.
Right, and to me, that system, the way that you've described it, I mean, we're supposed to catch glimpses, I think, of Jesus.
Absolutely,
in that,
absolutely,
of you find yourself completely isolated, you find yourself completely hopeless, and someone purchases for you through personal sacrifice, purchases the right for you to be grafted back into God's family.
Right.
And so we are, hundreds, thousands of years away from the time of Jesus, but Leviticus, and then several hundred years later, we find ourselves here. We just see this kind of God setting the stage for us. Because Boaz, he's a real person, and we should admire his real character, but kind of the way he seems to be functioning in the story really is, he's God's representative. He's the God Jesus figure in the story. And at sacrifice to himself, I'm going to take what I have and I'm going to sacrifice some of what I have for you. And she's going to, and we'll find this in Ruth chapter 3, and I don't want to skip over their courtship because their courtship is great. And I have some very specific questions I want to ask you about their courtship. But she's going to ultimately become his wife. But like you said, the son, though physically his, wouldn't be his. No,
it's actually, I mean, he actually is losing. He actually, in doing this, loses his own line, which is just, I don't really have anything to compare that to with our culture. Really. I try to think of something that's, it actually is. You think he's gaining, he gets some land, he gets some people, but like he's basically losing himself in that process. He now, that line, that his heir, that line is actually his brother's and not his.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So he's buying land, but he's not going to be able to keep it. It's going to go to his son.
Yeah.
Who's technically, legally in this system, not even his son.
Right.
Even though he, physically produced the son,
Right.
physically took care of the son, raised the son, provided for the son, bought the land. Ultimately, it diverges from his specific family. So it is a complete sacrifice that he makes, and ultimately for the benefit of other people, not him.
Right.
I mean, they have last names in the way that we think of it, but like the son wouldn't have his last name in the way that we think of it, wouldn't have would have a different last name.
Right.
And wouldn't be a part of his family technically. But he's willing to do that, which kind of gets to the point where it's like, it becomes a battle between Boaz and this other guy who's actually a little bit of a closer relative. And Boaz comes to him and says, hey, I've been asked to kind of redeem this land, but you're closer. Do you want it? And this dude's thinking, yeah, I'll buy some land.
Oh yeah, I'll take land. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's also got a woman attached to it. And what's that dude's response? Do you?
I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. I mean, he basically talks about a risk. Yeah. And it could get into something we read over. Like you read that and you go, oh, well, I just don't want some old woman living on my land. It isn't that at all. He completely understands my estate, everything that I've worked for, it would not be there anymore. I would be sacrificing all that. And that guy just wasn't willing to do it.
I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate.
Yeah. Which from what we've been saying, I think it clears up that a little bit more of what that endangering means. It isn't that, oh, there's going to be more people here and I'm not going to be able to feed everybody. That's kind of how I would read it through my natural lens. Oh, okay. It's just going to be a little bit iffy. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable.
Right.
There's a Moabite. Is that going to, I don't know if there's a foreigner. I don't know, but it really a lot more have to do with that whole line and air and what all of his stuff, where it goes.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So that's really cool. But in order to get there, we have a bit of, I don't know if romance is the right word or not, but so in the love story aspect of this, we have Boaz coming to check on his fields and the manager's there overseeing it. And he sees Ruth.
Yeah.
And his first line is, who's that? Who's that young woman? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, sometimes maybe I'm reading into it, but it's not like, hey, who's that in my field? Who's that?
Yeah. There's interest for sure.
Yeah. And then he finds out and is really excited actually that it's her, because not only has she caught his eye apparently, but he knows the story of the loyalty and love that.
Right.
So I want to be extra nice to you, not just simply because you caught my eye, but because you are beautiful on the inside from what you've done. And then we've got this line here. They're at meal. It says at mealtime, so it's dinner they're eating. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar." Now that just feels like, I mean, on the surface, that just is like, hey, have some food. And if I see more than that than there, I mean, am I reading into that? What do you think? It's just your opinion. I mean, it's like, hey, have a little. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it seems he definitely doesn't have to do that. I mean, he's already being generous, and the fact that he's gonna come over and kind of sit with us. There's something going on there. I mean, it isn't explicit, but man, it's so hard to not read between those lines and go, there's some kind of attraction. There's some sort of draw to this woman that Boaz has. And I think he's just taking opportunities to be like, come over here.
Yeah.
Over here.
He could have just, here, take some of this bread.
He could have sent, or he could have even given it to somebody and said, go take it to her over there. I mean, yeah. But the fact that he calls her over here, there's something there.
I think let's share bread together. Yeah. Let's share our bowl of wine vinegar together.
It's beyond just being kind. Yeah, there's something more.
Yeah, and so and I think maybe Ruth wouldn't catch it, but Naomi clearly did.
Oh yeah.
And in chapter 3, she's like, okay, I've got to find a home for you. And it seems like Boaz, he seems like he's not only does he have provision, but he seems to have some interest in you. Mm-hmm. And so this is the plan that Naomi comes with. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And so she said, hey, I'll do exactly what you said. And so verse 7, when Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in quote,
good spirits.
He went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Didn't quite make it to the bed. Just lying down in a big old pile of grain.
Here we are.
Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. So I'm just going to ask you a very straightforward question here, Cass. Is there more to that than what meets the eye, or is that just what I read is just all very straightforward and normal?
Right. I think like there's part of me that wants to see more there. There's some phrases in there that the way that they kind of lay this story out and some of these details is just a thing with Eastern literature, is that there isn't just stuff thrown in. Whenever there's a detail, when there's something there, there's a reason for it. And so the fact that we kind of talk through this whole thing, number one, we would have understood harvesting and the threshing floor and winnowing and all this kind of stuff, which we don't really get, but everyone's going to understand what that means. And it's a big party. They know they're going to sleep there because you got to protect. Somebody could come in. If you did all that work and then left, somebody come in the middle of the night and take it all away. But so this is all to the readers going to be very, very understandable. But this Naomi's setting her up, getting her all prettied up in order to catch his attention. And then this whole uncovers his feet. It's just a weird phrase. Why are you gonna uncover his feet? Like, that's just a weird phrase. It's a weird phrase.
And that doesn't really seem to have some sort of, like you've been doing all that. Oh, and in Leviticus,
No. There really isn't. And if you look at just that word uncover, the vast majority of the time that it is used in Old Testament, it means exposing. It isn't. Right. It isn't just lifting it means denude.
Right.
Right. And so to use that phrase with feet is also going to be kind of weird too. I mean, feet are out all the time. Like what are you going to expose your feet? Feet are always out. So it just seems to be leading to something else.
Yeah. At a bare minimum, it feels like that there is at least an erotic implication, an intimate implication here of more, not that she did anything to him, but just a very intimate, romantic gesture that has a bit of an erotic feel to it. I mean, and he woke up fairly startled by it, but also, and she put on her best perfume and her best dress, but then the really cool thing is, like, if to the degree that to say that was an erotic gesture of some kind, a proposal of some kind, I mean, what happens next is that he does the right thing. I mean, it could have just been, and so he just took her and had sex with her. But they talked about this kinsman redeemer thing, and I'm going to go about this the right way. There is in fact another relative that has an opportunity to do this before me. I want to do this the right way. I want to honor you. I want to honor God. I want to honor our laws. I want to honor our process. And so we kind of switch really main characters to some degree from Ruth to Boaz here, as he kind of steps in again as the Redeemer Jesus figure and just shows tremendous character, tremendous sacrifice, goes through the process, ultimately takes the land, takes Ruth, and they have a son, and Naomi's getting to have a grandson, and she's happy, Ruth's happy, everybody's happy, and the story ends with just like, with a neat little bow on it. And then at the very end, there's a genealogy, which we just skip these genealogies, right?
Right. I used to.
And it says, going through it here, we'll just pick in verse 21, Salmon was the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David.
Ding, 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 ding.
David, the second king, considered to be the greatest of all of the kings. And so it really turns out this is kind of a superhero origin story. That it's this incredible story about Ruth and her character. It's an incredible pre-Jesus story about redemption and saving and sacrifice. But really, it's all just kind of wrapped up in what for the original readers would have been just an incredible little whoa.
Right.
That the king, the greatest king, this is part of his story, and that a Moabite
of all people
is part of his line.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's just a lot of worldview shattering, I think that's happening here. And we don't necessarily feel that same level of impact. We kind of read that and go, oh, cool. David. I know that name. I don't know Salmon or Obed or Amminadab or Nahshon, or I don't know any of the people. Oh, David, I know that name.
Salmon, I've eaten that before.
Yeah. And so it's going to be a really great story of just God using an ordinary person like Ruth to show extraordinary character. And then we have Boaz coming in and showing what God does, what Jesus does, of just sacrificing himself in order to bring her in the way he brings us in. And then this story fits into this bigger picture story of what God is doing. And ultimately she gets to be connected to, considered by the Jewish people, probably definitely top 5.
Oh yeah.
Top 5 greatest people in their history.
Yeah.
And it really is just an amazing story. So thanks, Cass, for being here with us. I think just hopefully not only you guys can get a little bit more of the story of Ruth by kind of walking through it this way, but just kind of understanding how important it is to just kind of slow down and try to ask more questions about what's really going on here. And if you don't understand something, don't feel bad. Hang out there for a little while.
Yeah, don't feel bad.
Yeah. So, and thank you guys. Thank you for joining us. And if you are here in Northwest Arkansas, we'd love to see you some Sunday at the Grove Church. You can find all the details there at thegrovechurch.org/connect, or you can find us online and stream with us on Sunday morning, wherever you are. You can find us on Facebook or on YouTube. Either way, we would love to connect with you. And again, thanks for being with us on the Cultivate podcast.